heads above the parapet, Brendan. The Royal College has done the right thing, but this is now getting crazy that their default first draft could not see their way to saying mothers.
Exactly right. I mean, when you have the Royal College of Midwives, an organisation that deals primarily with women, well, exclusively with women, when even an organisation like that uses terms that avoid the word women and instead says things like postnatal people, then you know we have a real problem. We have a real problem with the way in which language is used, the way in which words are used, and the way in which womanhood is being erased from public life, being erased from public discussion. So I'm really pleased, as you say, that the Royal College of Midwives has apologised for its oversight and has promised not to do this again. But the fact that even a midwife association would use that kind of terminology, that is deeply worrying, and it raises really important questions about the way in which we understand womanhood in the 21st century.
Absolutely, but when I first joined GBNews all those months ago, I remember when I was saying one of the things I was fed up with in political discourse, having to speak as if one was walking on eggshells. Oh, I mustn't use that word, I mustn't use it because it's going to offend somebody. The fact of the matter is, this does nod to those who believe that people can identify whatever sex they or sexes that they wish to identify as. And that's fine. You can have a really good argument about whether they're right or wrong. But the fact that something like the Royal College of Midwives should have that as their default position is really deeply worrying.
Deeply, deeply worrying. And this is where the feminists and the other supporters of women's rights absolutely have a point when they say that the word woman is being erased and that the whole understanding of womanhood and the whole nature of womanhood is being erased in order to appease a very, very small number of people who believe in post-binary, non-binary, transgender ideology. When they say these things, they're absolutely right, because the Royal College of Midwives is entirely about helping women to give birth. That is what it exists to do. And when an organisation like that can't even use language that is specific to women's experiences and specific to womanhood itself, then you know that we have a very serious problem indeed. So the apology that they've given, or the promise that they've given to say that they will never do this again, they will never erase this word again, that's actually a very positive thing, because it shows that the pushback is working. The pushback in favour of reason, in favour of normal language, in favour of everyday words that people use, that is actually working. But the fact that they went to, as you say, that default position of saying postnatal people rather than women, which is, you know, women are the people who give birth, that is a problem in itself. And I think that raises questions about how far the gender ideology or the gender fluid ideology has really infiltrated institutions and warped how they think about everyday affairs.
Yes. I mean, also, the thing that struck me reading it as well, I mean, as the proud father of four, I know that any role that I had in being a postnatal person was essentially to be told by my wife to get out of the way because she knew what she was doing. Thank you very much indeed, and go and do something else. But the thing that reading the first draft of the Royal College of Midwives piece, the notion of chest feeding, i.e. you or me, as opposed to breastfeeding. If we tried that with an infant, then the poor little thing wouldn't last very long. I mean, it's medically inept by using what somebody thought was politically correct language.
Absolutely medically inept and deeply offensive, I think. You know, the fact is that chest feeding is an impossibility. The only people who can feed children are women. The only people who have cervixes are women. The only people who can give birth are women. We have to be honest about this fact. Now, some of those women may identify as men. And of course, most of us, because we're quite polite, we are willing to allow people to have their identities and to have their own terminology. We're willing to go along with that and to use the pronouns that they would prefer that we use. But the fact is that if you give birth, if you breastfeed, if you are someone who suckles a child and looks after a child in that early instance of life, you are a woman. And the erasure of that kind of language, the erasure of that way in which the vast majority of people understand the relations between the sexes and the differences between men and women, I find that deeply problematic, because I think that is about reordering how we understand the sexes, how we understand biology, how we understand society itself. So I think there's something deeply Orwellian about this attempt to rearrange language, rearrange words, to scrub certain words and ideas from the public record. That's something that should concern all of us who believe in freedom and reason. And I think a pushback against the Royal College of Midwives and other institutions that are using this terminology is actually incredibly important.
So do I. The final point is that I think if you want to have an intelligent and open-minded debate on things like trans and identification and what have you, you've got to be able to use the language that comes naturally to you and to me and everybody else, else you're never going to be ending up with the articulate truth.
Exactly right. And we also have to think about young people as well, children and teenagers. You know, how are people socialized into the world? They're socialized into the world through thinking about mothers and fathers, men and women, boys and girls. And I'm very worried about the impact that this kind of erasure of sex differences and erasure of biological language, the impact that that has on young people in particular, who often understand their surroundings and their relationships through these biological ideas. So we absolutely have to defend the right of people to use those kinds of terms. And I'm really pleased, actually, that the Royal College of Midwives has recognised its mistake and promised not to do it again. And I hope more institutions do that.
Hear, hear. Hats off to the Royal College, but a shame that it was the default position initially.